Dear students, in this video we are going to see the experiment number 6, implementation of hierarchical clustering for the course 20 CS 2032 Machine Learning Techniques Lab. Hierarchical clustering is a category of unsupervised learning algorithm which is mainly used to group the similar objects into a cluster. And hierarchical clustering creates hierarchy of clusters by doing merging or splitting of the data based on the similarity measures. There are mainly two types of hierarchical clustering. First one is the agglomerative hierarchical clustering and next one is the divisive hierarchical clustering. In agglomerative hierarchical clustering, the data are merged to a similar clusters iteratively by starting each data point as a separate cluster. By seeing this diagram, initially the data points individually belong to a cluster. At every iteration, the data points which is close together merge and form a new clusters. Like that, it will be repeated and finally it will create a tree-like structure that shows the relationship between the clusters and the hierarchy. The diagrammatic representation of this tree structure will be known as dendrogram. This is the algorithm steps. So based on the input data points, first we compute the distance matrix. The distance matrix will be computed by using the metrics such as Euclidean distance or Manhattan distance or the cosine similarity. And from the distance matrix, the smallest distance will be identified. So the cluster data point 1 and 2 will be first merged together. And when it merged, the minimum value of the two values in that particular column will be replaced in the new distance matrix. In the second iteration, we have to find the next two clusters which are very similar together. And based on the distance, this is the minimum distance. So the next data point 3 and 5 will be merged together. Like that, we will update the distance matrix to create a new cluster every step until all the clusters are merged together to create a single cluster. And this diagram helps you to identify in the first iteration, the data points 1 and 2 will be similar, so they are clustered together. In the next iteration, the data points 3 and 5 are close together, so it is get merged. In the iteration 3, the data points already merged 1, 2 and that will be combined with 4 to form a new cluster with 1 to 4 and the next cluster is 3, 5. And finally, these two clusters are merged together, so all data points belong to a single cluster. And the same thing will be represented in a dendrogram. In a dendrogram, initially the data points 1 and 2 is clustered and in the next iteration 3 and 5 will be clustered together and the next iteration the data point 1, 2 along with 4 will be clustered together. Finally, all data points belong to a single cluster. And how will you decide the number of clusters you need? So there is a thing called as threshold point or a cut point. Threshold point or cut point. So when we make a cut in the distance value 12, we can get two clusters. So one cluster have the data points 1 to 4. The first cluster have the data point 1 to 4. The second cluster have the data point 3, 5. Suppose we are making a threshold cut in the distance threshold 8. So now we are getting three clusters. The first cluster having the data points 1 and 2. The second cluster having the data point 4. And the third cluster having the data point 3 and 5. The next type of hierarchical clustering is the divisive clustering. The divisive clustering starts with a single cluster where all the data points belong to a single cluster. Every iteration, the farthest point will be split from the cluster and will repeat this procedure until each data point belongs to a single cluster. So how will you measure the clusters before merging them? There are various standard ways we can measure the nearest pair of clusters before merging them. So that can be a single linkage, complete linkage, average linkage and the word linkage. And this is the algorithmic step. First, we have to import the necessary Python libraries. Next, read the data. Then we will do the pre-processing. If there is any missing value, do the imputation using mean imputation, and then standardize the data and decide the linkage approach that need to be adapted for the clustering, either a single linkage, complete linkage or quad linkage, and draw the corresponding dendrogram and apply the hierarchical clustering algorithm by specifying three information, that is the number of clusters and the distance matrix used, and the linkage criteria need to be used. And finally, visualize the cluster using the scatter plot. The performance of the clustering algorithms are measured using three performance metrics, that is mutual information score, Silhouette score and the Davis-Bondlin index. And this is the corresponding Python code to implement the hierarchical clustering. So first we have to read the data. Next we have to do the imputation. Then standardize the data. After standardizing, we decide the linkage criteria. We can pass different linkage criteria and also we can pass different Euclidean metrics like that Manhattan distance, cosine similarity, different metrics we can pass in the linkage. And once the linkage are formed, then we can display the dendrogram for the corresponding linkage data. And next we have to do the agglomerative clustering. First we need to specify the number of clusters, and next we need to specify the distance metrics, and then we have to pass the linkage criteria. So by changing the different values to these parameters, we can analyze which is the best cluster for your application. And once the clustering model is developed, we have to using the fit and predict to identify the labels of the input data. And these are the performance metrics, that is mutual information score, Silhouette score and Davis-Bondlin score. So we have our labels. So we need to perform the comparison with the any one features from the input data, how this input data is correlated to the output label. We need to calculate the mutual information score. And same thing, we have to calculate how the labels will be correlating with the input data in terms of the Silhouette score and the Davis-Bondlin score. So once we get the hierarchical cluster, so we can use two parameters from my input and display the scatter plot to represent the number of labels, to represent the number of clusters between the two input features available in your data set. So this is the overall information about the hierarchical clustering algorithm. I hope you understand the hierarchical clustering and how to implement the hierarchical clustering with the Python implementation. Thank you.